But hello, I'm Matt Bowes. I'm the general manager. There's George, he's waving. I'm the general manager of New West Press. And yeah, thank you for coming to our book launch. So just give it a couple more minutes and get everyone in here. And then we got quite the treat for you tonight. So yeah, tell your friends. Oh, I hear birds. Thank you for not watching sports games tonight. There's hockey, basketball, everything's happening. But you came out to witness literature. It's fantastic.
Wait a minute, are the Leafs playing tonight?
Oh, I don't know. I'm from Edmonton.
Bye.
I think they actually are playing tonight, the Leafs. So.
Oh my God, I'll VCR it.
Okay. Got some more people streaming in. Perfect.
Now, am I supposed to see more than you, or are you the main attraction here?
Well, if you've got it on speaker mode, you would see just me, but that's probably the best way to do it because
Okay.
we're going to have more people come in. And if I could ask everyone who isn't me right now to mute, that would be ideal for now. Or Meredith could do it to everybody. Perfect. Okay. Should we go for it? Oh, a couple more. Oh, Darcy's here. All right, let's start. And anyone else who streams in, if they're confused, that's not my problem. Hi everyone, my name is Matt Bowes, and I'm the general manager of New West Press in Edmonton, Alberta. And tonight we are here to celebrate the publication of George Bowering's new collection, Good Morning Poems. So this is a collection of the finest works of English literature, poetry, starting from Wyatt and going all the way to Margaret Avison. So quite the wide swath of poets here. Like to thank People's Co-op, the bookstore in Vancouver. You'll be seeing links from them in the chat. There's Alicia. Hi, Alicia. You'll be seeing links from them in the chat. So if you are interested in the wares available for purchase, there'll be a link right there. You could buy it and then bam. You know, what could be better? We got quite the cast of characters tonight. And I guess I will introduce first Stuart Ross, who is our opening act / sounding board / comedy partner. There's going to be a lot of back and forth in this one. But Stuart's going to read from some of his work, and then we're going to move into George's book. But before then, I'll just get my production coordinator, Meredith Thompson, to come in with the land acknowledgement for Edmonton and Vancouver.
Thank you, Matt. So I've combined them. So People's Co-op and George are in Vancouver. New West Press is located in Edmonton. So New West Press wishes to acknowledge that the land on which we operate is Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Nakota Sioux. We would like to also acknowledge the city of Vancouver, which is situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations since time immemorial. I would like to add that decolonization is not achieved through acknowledgement alone, and that much more work is yet to be done in Canada's journey towards truth and reconciliation. Enjoy.
Thank you, Meredith. And gotta say, People's Co-op Bookstore would be an excellent place to go and get some books and learn about the colonial condition of the country. But now I'm going to introduce Stuart Ross as our first reader tonight. So Stuart Ross is the author of 20 books of fiction, poetry, and essays. He received the 2019 Harbourfront Festival Prize, the 2017 Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Poetry, and the 2010 Relit Award for Short Fiction. His work has been translated into Nynorsk, French, Spanish, Estonian, Slovenian, and Russian. Stuart lives in Cobourg, Ontario, so welcome to the podium, Stuart.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the introduction, and it is such an honor to be joining George for the launch of his amazing new anthology. And it's so great to see so many cool friends here who I haven't seen in a long time. I'm going to, I may or may not read from any of the books that are linked there, but if you like what I'm reading, you'll like those other books too. I was going to read some new things. About 11 years ago, I wrote a terrible poem for George and Jean and sent it off to them, and I'm really embarrassed by it. So I spent all last night trying to make a good poem out of it. So we'll see what happens. And this poem is called Poetry or Baseball, and it's dedicated to our mutual friend, Terry Taylor in New Denver, BC, where this takes place. From my shuddering kayak, I look back to see George turn to Jean, see his lips move, his hands swing in the air. Because he is Bowering, it's about poetry or baseball or the story of Audie Murphy, who played himself into Hell and Back, 1955, directed by Jesse Hibbs. I feel safe only when the kayak is moving, but now it is still, like the surface of Slocan Lake, and I start to panic. I imagine the obscene creatures so far below me hiding in the planktonic algae, waiting to crunch my bones in their terrible jaws. I swing around and grasp the boat's sides with my trembling hands, try to steady my nerves, peer over the bow to my destination, feel the sun prickle the back of my neck. Again, I clutch the oars and push through the water toward the small sandy beach where glacier meets earth, and after several minutes or several years, I climb clumsily from the kayak, alive and unbowed, knees buckling, and bowered by a cluster of trees. I write a haiku about Dave McFadden or a cloud shaped just like him, and counting the syllables steadies my nerves, at least for 17 seconds. George and Jean, they are magnificent specks now on the opposite shore of Slocan Lake. They are guiding stars. I jam my haiku into my pocket, climb back into my craft, and as I paddle again toward them, my arms and legs tangled, I hear their deep laughter bounce across the glassine lake because Ross, whose state is usually inert, has just paddled a kayak. He actually paddled a kayak to hell and back, and no one will ever believe it. And because this book of George's that we're launching today is half anthology, half commentary, I thought I would read a poem about back in the 1960s when I was a little kid and I started writing poems, as a little kid writing poems. Every single anthology seemed to be edited by the same person. And this is a poem about that person and me and our imaginary meeting. It's called "And Oscar Williams Walks In." I'm sitting in my bedroom listening to Linda Ronstadt's Heart Like a Wheel, and then Leo Sayers' Just a Boy, and after that Randy Newman's Sail Away, for which I read the lyrics on the record sleeve while it plays, every word, even though I've listened to it about 100 times before, and my mother's in the kitchen burning steaks and making mashed potatoes, and she yells up, "Stuart, your friend is here." And Oscar Williams, as I later find out his name is, walks in wearing a bow tie and John Lennon glasses and says, "I see you like reading." And it's not because I'm reading the lyrics to Simon Smith and the Amazing Dancing Bear at that moment, but because I follow his eyes. One wall of my room is covered in bookshelves. I find him pretty creepy, even though I have a lot of friends who are older than me, mostly because of this poetry workshop led by a guy named George Miller I go to every Saturday with Mark Laba, where everyone is older than us. "Have you ever read this?" asks Oscar Williams, and he holds out a moldy copy of Immortal Poems of the English Language. "I saw you have a mother down there. My mother was named Hannah Rappaport, and my father was named Musia Kaplan. I am Williams in the same way you are Ross. Have you ever read this?" Oscar Williams asks, and he holds out a dog-eared copy of the new pocket anthology of American verse from colonial days to the present. They're pretty good, you know. They have some poems by people like Ezra Pound and Robert Frost and Edna St. Vincent Millay and William Carlos Williams and Oscar Williams, of course. Do you want to go hang out at the cigar store? The album cover for Sail Away has a big picture of Randy Newman's face, and I hold it up over my own face, so it looks like I am actually Randy Newman. Pardon me, says Oscar Williams. I thought you were Stuart Ross, teenage author of such immortal poems as Jesus Tobacco and Ritual of the Concrete Penguins. I died in 1964, so sometimes I get confused. And then he is gone, like it was a dream. I go downstairs where my mother is opening a can of peas and say, why did you let that guy in, Mom? And she says, what guy? All that rock music you play is giving me a headache and you hallucinations. Go wash your hands. We're having dinner soon. It is 1974. In 42 years, I will include this poem in a book called A Sparrow Came Down Resplendent. Barry and Owen sit down at the table, and me and my mom and dad, we take turns trying to pronounce Worcestershire. And I'll just read a couple more poems, newer poems again. Oh yeah, which one am I going to read here? Okay, I'm going to read two more poems. So this one is called I Love Poetry. I hate poems that contain the word mortal, the word angel, the word liminal, the word beauty, the word scent. Mortal coil is particularly loathsome, though Eddie Coyle was mortal, is passable. I hate poems that mention Perseus, Heracles, Hephaestus, Infestus, Hydrochlorexidus, but I like hideous, rancid, gizmo. Or Orpheus is okay if it's in a poem by Mark Strand. Eclogue, blech. Epilogue, pretty good. I hate the word ekphrastic so much that it makes me hate ekphrastic poems, except for Ron Padgett's Joe Brainard's painting Bingo, which is the best poem ever written. I met Joe Brainard once to interview him and was delighted he had never heard of Margaret Atwood. I hate poems that contain the phrase, I love, unless they are written by Lisa Jarnow. And I love Lisa Jarnow's poem, Lisa Jarnow. I hate poems that want to teach me something. Epigraphs from Isaiah, Leviticus, and Dana Goya are non-starters. Epigraphs from Don Knotts and Gertrude Stein are showstoppers. I hate myself for loving poetry. I love myself for hating poetry. I hate poems about poetry. And I said I was going to read one more. We're going to tuck in two more poems. Okay. I wasn't really prepared for any of this. That's actually the name of the poem. I wasn't really prepared for any of this. For the blue-green fog that permeated my brain, the glacier in my glass of Coke, the dog that quoted Heraclitus, the book whose vowels blinked on and off like a Broadway sign, I just wasn't prepared. The wind that blew the river away, the tree that took my car for a joyride, the cartoon duck that bore my voice, the executioner's winsome smile and endearing cowlick, the burlesque dancer in my cereal bowl, I confess I simply wasn't ready. For the library filled to the ceiling with bright-eyed dolls' heads and expressionless war criminals, I came unprepared. And just as I opened my suitcase and looked for some socks, I reached for my nose, found empty clothes. I just thought I'd get a little formalist at that end there, have a little rhyming couplet, and one more poem here. This is called Bouncing Ball. A tour guide appears in your living room, followed by a cluster of tourists brandishing wooden spoons. You are sitting in the old wing chair, reading a hardcover copy of Marjorie Morningstar. The spirit of your dog lies curled at your feet, doesn't even lift her adorable head to acknowledge the visitors. You ask these people not to get fingerprints on your walls, not to clack their spoons so much, not to draw swastikas on the synagogue, to help themselves to some fruit, to maybe have a cup of tea, to file out the back door and never come back. You tell the tour guide you are not a monument, a historical plaque, a famous painting, a notable grave, a landmark. You pull a couple of 20s from your pocket and push them into his fist. I will never forget you, you say. Outside, the winter fires are crackling. A northern cardinal darts out from the smoke, flourishes its wings, swoops toward the lake to admire its own reflection. The horizon undulates. The full moon bounces along it like the ball bouncing along the song lyrics in one of those old cartoons, a technique invented in the 1920s by Max Fleischer. You dog-ear your page in the book, pull on your grandfather's galoshes, and hobble after the moon, singing her perfect song, becoming smaller and smaller, yes, smaller, as you disappear into the impossible luminosity of tomorrow. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Stuart. Those are great. If you check in the chat, Alicia's put links to some of Stuart's books you can pick up, and highly encourage you to do so. There we go. There's the links again. So if you like what Stuart's laying down here, why not go buy some books? We are recording right now, so there will probably be some time for communication, questions and stuff, because it's going to be more of an interactive sort of display from George here in a minute. So what we're going to ask you to do after a series of reading is, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Meredith's keeping an eye on it, and you may be called upon to speak it out in person on your camera, but that's how we're going to handle that. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce George and Good Morning Poems. So according to his bio, George approaches literature as he does life, with a playful gravity and a grave merriness that makes intellectual life and writing seem at once attractive, unintimidating, and remarkable. He dispels the myth of literature being hard or tricky and demonstrates, as he reads and chats, the accessible and enriching nature of great literature. Two-time Governor General's Award winner and Canada's first poet laureate, Bowering was born in the Okanagan Valley, attended the University of British Columbia, and has taught literature at the University of Calgary, Western Ontario, Simon Fraser, Concordia, Montreal. And he and his wife, Jean, live in Vancouver. So welcome to the stage, George Bowering.
Hi, I'd just like to say that first poem of, what's his name again? Stuart? No, that other guy you had anyway with the white hair. That poem was so good. It was like really, really good. It made me want, in fact, I think we should do another edition of this book with nothing in it but that poem over and over and over and over again. That would be
sell these ones first, George, then you can do that.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to read or try to read or maybe misread. In fact, I feel like giving a lecture. I think in the olden days, I used to be a professor. Why don't I just give a lecture? Okay. How to fix your bicycle in the snow. No. Okay, here goes. First thing in the morning, the older I get, the more things I have to do first thing in the morning. You know, exercises, face washing, except the last 4 days when we haven't had any hot water, eye drops, air puffer, pills, hearing aids, and so forth. Takes nearly an hour to get to cereal and banana and coffee. These are all things I have to do before I get to do what I want to do, which is to read a poem. Morning is the best time to read a poem. One morning it might be some lines by Christopher Marlowe. Next morning could be the new volume from Nicole Brossard in French or English. Often I will go page by page through a new edition of a book by one of my friends. But if you're going to read a poem to welcome your day, it seems to me best to choose something you've read before. Either a return to something you could not quite follow some decades earlier, or a poem you've read so often that you just about have it by heart. Thinking of probably my favorite poem of all time, Shelley's Mont Blanc, which I have understood 2 3/4 times. It's extremely, extremely difficult and absolutely gorgeously beautiful. And I did not put it in this anthology because everybody else would look so awful. I mean, Robert Frost would look even worse than he normally does next to Shelley. Some people like to go for a walk in the wood or to the coffee shop in the morning. Some poets have even written poems about morning walks. I'm not that extreme. I'll settle for a chair at the table, cup of dark coffee, page or two of Denise Levertov. Lots of poets have written to or about the early hours, which suggests that if you are working on the New York Times crossword and thus have a pen in your hand, it might be as pleasant to write a poem as to read one. I'd just as soon read a poem, say January Morning by William Carlos Williams, any month of the year. Maybe my morning poem routine began before my morning coffee did. When I was a boy, I had a series of books entitled Junior Classics, 10 volumes, hardback from Collier. The books were color-coded, with volume 10 being pink for poems. I eventually let my sister keep the other 9 and kept this one, which is now 100 years old. There are many forgettable poems and forgotten poets in it, but that's where I first found Shelley's Skylark and Goldsmith's Deserted Village and the North Wind that blew anonymous my way. Yes, I've always wanted to put together a collection of the poems I like. It's likely that lots of people, whether they read poems in the morning or not, would like to make such an anthology. Maybe some of them think that it would be interesting to make a few remarks to or about the poems and put them across the page from each one. I know I did, and here they are. I hope that readers might like to offer their own responses to the poems or to the other pages. And by the way, when I say morning poems, I might not mean the same thing that you do, because I only was told recently that there's such a thing as like 8 in the morning or 7 in the morning. I think morning for me means 10:30. Yeah, starts around 10:30, you know. Yeah. So there it is. Now I'm going to give you, am I going to give them? Am I going to tell them who's next?
The Georgettes?
Or, yeah, I give you the Georgettes. This to be what Linda Lee Crossfield and Leslie McBain are not all the Georgettes. They're just the cutest.
And they're going to read a couple of
And they're going to read a poem and a comment about that poem, the poem by Shakespeare, yeah, number 55, sonnet 55, and Gertrude Stein. I figure boy, girl, and if I don't publish these people, who the hell's going to, eh? The Georgettes.
Hi, I'm Linda Crossfield, and I am going to read William Shakespeare's Sonnet 55. Not marble nor the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive this powerful rhyme, but you shall shine more bright in these contents than unswept stone besmeared with sluttish time. When wasteful war shall statues overturn and broils root out the work of masonry, nor Mars his sword nor war's quick fire shall burn the living record of your memory. Against death and all oblivious enmity shall you pace forth. Your praise shall still find room even in the eyes of all posterity that wear this world out to the ending doom. So till the judgment that yourself arise, you live in this and dwell in lovers' eyes.
Hi, I'm Leslie McBain, the second cutest of the Georgettes. A main purpose of the blues, or its less musical offering, hip hop, is rhyming boastfulness with all its humorous effrontery. Howlin' Wolf may have been 300 pounds of heavenly joy, and the notorious B.I.G. thought he was something with all my N-words, all my guns, all my women. But William Shakespeare got a head start 400 years earlier and is not likely to be overtaken anytime soon, if ever. He had the advantage in talent and intelligence. The conventional reading is that Sonnet 55 was in a sequence addressed to a mysterious youth, but it doesn't take much more than a glance to see that the poet was thinking of his readers far in the future. The poet's boast is that this poetic monument, a word whose root meaning is memory, will itself be alive even when stone memorials have gone, while the world is wearing away. So you will be living, let's say 4 centuries from now, and he has delivered on his boast. Most formerly gilded monuments are now bereft of their gold, and most are already Osmondiuses on the ground. This poem, about this poem, though, partakes of spirit. It's made of breath and hence lives when life does. In fire, the creative destructive element, if fire, the creative destructive element, could incinerate every printed record of the poem would survive, and thus so would the commemorated one. Shakespeare's ear is the horn of the immortal. Mars rhymes with wars, and ironically, such music will sing the subject alive. You live in this. This poet resembles the creator in Genesis, doesn't he? Thank you. I will read the Gertrude Stein poem, and then my friend Linda will read the essay. The house was just twinkling in the moonlight, Gertrude Stein. The house was just twinkling in the moonlight, and inside it, twinkling with delight, is my baby bright. Twinkling with delight in the house, twinkling with moonlight. Bless my baby bright. Bless my baby twinkling with delight in the house, twinkling in the moonlight. Her hubby dear loves to cheer when he thinks, and he always thinks when he knows, and he always knows that his blessed baby wifey is all here, and he is all hers, and sticks to her like burrs. Blessed baby.
I like it better as more time I hear it.
Of course, we know that this is a traditional love poem because it invokes or at least mentions the moon, or at least its light. It is further a found poem, not in the usual sense of that term, that is, a poem that was embedded, perhaps accidentally, in some other use of words, such as a government announcement. In this case, it was one of the many love notes left by Gertrude Stein after a night's work on some other writing, to be found by Stein's wifey, Alice B. Toklas, who woke each day to begin her work, the typing of the writing that Stein had done in the late night and early morning. You might consider these discoveries to follow a tradition that includes the poems that Queen Elizabeth I wrote on the walls and windows of her prison residence, and the little poem that William Carlos Williams left in the icebox to apologize to his wife for eating the delicious plums she had been saving for breakfast. It is hard to read Stein's poem without vocalizing, isn't it? And when you do, you come across her famous repetition that is not really repetition, as Stein said more than once, because the second time the poem says thinks, it is in the act of echoing the first time it said thinks, and this is in the context of all that twinkling. You do see, don't you? Or rather, you do hear. Or rather, you, like the blessed baby, hear the baby talk that is love talk, whether here or hers.
Yeah,
George, can you move over a little bit?
sure.
So now we're going to pretend that I'm George Bowering.
He's suddenly better looking.
We've structured the evening this way because George's eyesight has deteriorated so badly he could not do it himself. And poetry creates friendships and bonds and a sense of community, which is what his project. Will it go off by itself?
No.
It's time for George to watch Jeopardy. I have to go and turn off his phone.
I have an alarm that says it's Jeopardy time.
George, you have no idea. Every time I watch Jeopardy,
Yeah.
and I think I've emailed you about this a couple times,
Yeah.
I think of you. I just want you to know that.
Oh, that's so romantic.
I know.
So we've structured the evening so that we can all participate in this. because George could not possibly have read all of this, and the font size for what he read is huge. But it's very much in the spirit of the way this whole project came together. So because it's evening, I'm going to read the afterword, which is how to enjoy a good evening poem. Here is the way this project began. A few years ago, my wife, Jean Baird, invented a new social literary evening. For years, we have been hosting a book club, and for as many years, we had been hosting potluck dinners. Why don't we, she suggested, have meetings at which we discuss single poems instead of books, and at the same time, and at the same gatherings, have potlucks in which the food illustrates in some manner the poem of the evening. So we did. First, I would choose a one-page poem. Then Jean would send via email to all our members. You can imagine an ingredient pertinent to Blake's "Ah, Sunflower." That night, my God, we had it food shaped in stars. Everything was, if you take a star-shaped pasta and cook it in turmeric, it does the job. Yes, someone brought a bottle of L. Purry's wild grape wine to Emerson's Concord hymn. The New Brunswick genius, David Farwell, had to perform some complicated argument for coming to every meeting with his reportedly famous meatloaf. But my favorite dish, or call it feat, was carried off and carried in by the novelist Kevin Chong. Taking John Keats' grave marker at the Protestant graveyard just outside Rome's ancient wall as his inspiration, Kevin presented a big gravestone-shaped block of jelly the color of water, into the surface of which were inserted the black jelly letters Keats. You might want to do something like that, or you might want to get yourself a lined notebook and do what I did, write a page in response to each of the poems in this little book. So in the absence of George's ability to read the poems, we called in our poetry team. And thank you, Georgettes, for helping out.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie and Linda. Should we go to some questions, George?
Sure.
Okay, I'll start one off because
that's what they're doing on Jeopardy right now. So
yeah, mine probably won't be such brain busters, but you've identified poems to read in the morning, and you've also shown us how to read poems in the evening. Is there a lunchtime version of a poem?
Wow.
This is to you and Stuart. Is there, like, because lunchtime's a bit more rushed, or you're at work, like, is lunchtime a shorter poem? Is lunchtime a food related poem? How do you square that circle?
I don't eat lunch, so I read poems instead. I always forget to eat. Almost always forget to eat lunch, and then if Jean's around, she makes something for me, like eels.
Thea beat me to it. I was going to say, ask Frank O'Hara as well.
Lunch poems.
But I wanted to mention that when I heard the title of the book and saw the cover, and my indie is still bringing the book in, so I've only read the PDF so far. I was expecting these morning poems. I don't know how I thought that. I was expecting these inspiring, wonderful poems that would make you feel wonderful. And instead, the book is such an incredible grab bag of all sorts of incredible poems. I was absolutely fascinated. And the other thing that was fantastic for me about your book, and I think I'm going off your question there, Matt, but when I was a teenager, I read Donne and I read Sidney and I read Shakespeare. I read so much of that stuff from centuries past, and I've felt guilty in recent decades that I read almost entirely, poetry from the 60s to the present. And I've been telling myself I've got to go back to those poems someday. And I'm getting on. And George's book was this fantastic way of finding my way back to those kinds of poems, those poems that are they relevant anymore to me? And it's been so fantastic reading some of those poems and some that I hadn't read before. And George's commentary almost always comes from some very unexpected angle or brings out something that I never would have imagined. So I think this is such a beautiful and perfect book, just covering these centuries, and it's sort of saving me. So thanks, George.
It's kind of what happened with Poetry Potluck, because George is not trying to do a definitive discussion of the poem. It's a gift to open up and say, how can we start talking about this?
Yeah.
Which is what would happen. So the deal was we would have the potluck, we'd eat dinner, and then we'd talk about the poem. And after we talked about the poem, we'd have dessert. Sometimes dessert was a far, far, far away event, because we would talk for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'd go off in another direction. We would talk like for an hour and a half about the poem. So those little essays are, what about this to take you, so what about that, right?
Yeah, I was interested in, am I getting, if I say something, people hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I want it to be unlike a creative writing class. In a creative writing class, all the guy, reads his thing, and then everybody else tells you what they like. Oh, I like the blah, blah, blah. Oh, and I like the way they did this. Oh, and I like the rhyme. Who gives a shit what these people like? What we're supposed to be talking about is the poem, right? And what a peculiar thing it might do to you. Not and say, oh, geez, I hope George likes this. That's did you know that Mr. Ross and I we both have the same favorite living American poet. Yeah. So that's another thing that draws us together. Besides, the way we look.
My incredible kayaking skills.
Yeah.
Well, we should let people know that particular day, Stuart arrived in the dark.
Yeah.
In the Kootenays.
Yeah.
And was staying at a place
Adler
that
in
had
the
a
dark.
driveway that actually had switchbacks on it. So he hadn't actually seen where he was, and he woke up in the morning and looked out the window, and there he is.
Look,
And before that, he'd never been north of Bloor, I'm sure.
Not only that, but how many hours did you spend in front of the pass afraid to drive all the way?
Yeah, be a couple hours to get over the 20-minute pass.
I love Stuart Ross's poetry, and always will and always have. So there you go.
I'm going to throw in one more thing, totally out of order, and I see there's questions there to be asked, but I want to throw this one more thing in. I love this book of George's, Writing and Reading. I love all of George's books of little essays. And there's one here called Hooray Difficulty. And he says, as soon as I get up in the morning, I sit down and read a few pages of poetry. Sometimes I read poetry that runs on the tracks and offers up the kind of enjoyment you get from the familiar or easy. Good poems with some quirky moments, I would say. Probably more often, I will be reading harder stuff. I have spent a lifetime reading books that are difficult to read. Let's use the U word. I have all my life persisted in reading poetry and prose that I don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah, like why shouldn't you? I mean, there you are, right? God or whoever up there puts you down and says, okay, chum, you've got 65 years. Let's see what you can do. And you say, oh my God, I cover all that. So what's the use of oh God, that's so hard. Can't we just do the same thing we did yesterday? Like teenagers listening to rap? No, two people recently in Canada have put out books with titles that mean reading hard literature. Right? One's like Quartermain has one, something about, I can't remember what, Cheers for the Difficult or something like that. And the other one, My friend that was born in Alberta and just died in Newfoundland. I can't remember. Stan Dragland. Yeah, he had another book on the difficult, right? And it's the most it's I don't know why everybody doesn't think that. Why that's not the first logical thing. Oh, let's try something I haven't tried before. Let's try reading something I don't understand. Like that Shelley poem that every once in a while I get it, right? Or like I've been reading Ezra Pound now for 70 years, and I'm still and I think, thank goodness, but you know, I read Robert Frost once, and who cares, right? It's over. He tells you, in fact, at the end of the poem, Robert Frost always tells you what it was about, right? What could be worse than be a swinger of birchers, or whatever it was. Yeah, I have miles to go before I sleep. Yeah, we'll get going. Right.
We got a question in the chat for you, George, from William Thompson. William asks, how much of you as a teacher is part of the book?
All of it, I guess. One thing when I was teaching, I saw this kind of as an extension of the job of reading poetry and trying to write poetry and trying to understand it. And I saw teaching as an extension of that. And I suppose I don't think it works the other way around, because I don't grade my poems. I don't grade poems. Like it was an M is an A minus or something like that. But yeah, there's a feeling that even I have shared that, oh, the academic life is going to ruin you as a writer. But I found out after spending all those years that it doesn't. That as a matter of fact, you can use one to help work on the other. So if I were young enough and asked to teach a course at some university, I might use this as a textbook.
I mean, that's a great idea. We'd love that too. So
yeah.
Some of the reviews have mentioned that this book would be an absolute gift to teachers, to particularly like high school students, for example, to show them how you can talk about poetry.
Yeah. And you don't have to, and they don't get to say, I like.
I guess I've got no other questions in the chat, so I'll run another one by you. Have you found that, both you and Stuart, have you found that with social media and Twitter especially, that concision has been useful in poetry? I know that in Twitter, they just extended the amount that you could fit into a tweet, but I always used to try and hit exactly 140 characters when I was writing, and on Twitter back in the day. And I felt like it really makes you sit down and focus. And that's sort of what poetry is too, just paring everything back to exactly what you need. But do you think that like newer poets these days are verbose or less verbose, possibly because of what they're using and what they're writing on typically?
I wrote 2 or 3 poems on Twitter before I quit using Twitter.
2 or 3?
Yeah, well, no.
Dozens and dozens and
2 or 3 long poems made of little wee tiny poems.
Oh, I see.
Like for instance, and we tried to retrieve them afterwards, but I don't know, I think I got some of them. But for instance, one of them, I took the names of various streets in the Vancouver and its suburbs, and made some witty line of poetry out of that street name, and for 3 or 4 other such things. And then and earlier when we were all just beginning to use computers, Fred Waugh and I wrote letters to each other almost every day, and always included a haiku. So we were on a real haiku. So we were creating what Japanese haiku guys were doing in the first place. Was like, oh, do you think that's a pretty good haiku? Listen to this one, blah, blah, which is exactly how haiku was handled and written in Japan. So we did that. But I'm not much interested in social media now that it's been taken over by pornography and people that hate people and so on and so forth. I'm just not that much interested in it. And so there are some of those things that I don't even know what they are. I've seen their names, but I don't know what they are. And I don't belong to any. I use email, but I'm not much interested in that. There might be some genius thing happen that'll save the world, but I kind of doubt it.
I have a question. What the
Go
heck?
ahead.
What the heck is a Georgette?
What do you mean?
Linda, Leslie, I think you guys should explain why you're Georgettes.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I think it had to do with a fairly good amount of alcohol when we were meeting about every year, I think, or maybe more often than that back in the day at some place.
But it started with the Victoria School of Writing, yeah?
Say what? Sorry?
It started with the Victoria School of Writing.
Yeah. Well, I don't think, it started with the Victoria School of Writing, but I think the Georgettes actually evolved. Linda, help me out here. What am I saying? I'm 75 years old. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
That's what I told you every time you showed me a poem.
Linda, you tell the story.
Well, yes, a group of us joined George at the late lamented Victoria School of Writing in 2005, I guess it was. And then afterwards, all the class people started emailing back and forth, and George jumped in, which we found pretty amazing. And so this email conversation sort of kept on for about a year. And then we decided we should have a reunion. And so we did. We rented a house in Vancouver, in East Van somewhere, that had rats, as I recall. It was an interesting place, but it was an adventure. And yeah, I think that was basically when the Georgettes came together.
Yeah, and
George's little fan club.
I think the most recent one, the one at that fishing place on the river over on Vancouver Island.
Yeah, that was nice. That was nice. Yeah, we did have a good thing going there, and I hope we get to do it again with all the same players. Poetry became secondary, really, if y'all want to know.
Well, don't tell them about that.
Oh, okay. So we did read. We did do some exercises and read, but it was just so lovely to have a group of poets with history and with some events that were some that were joyous and some that were tragic, and we've all bonded really closely on that. And yeah, let's do it again. And you're all invited to get a bigger house.
Several years ago, Linda and Ted, they used to go to this place down in Mexico, on the coast of Mexico, and straight west across from Mexico City, La Manzanilla. And one time, Linda and I were walking, I think, or was it you? One of us was, I was walking with one of my fans around some of the back streets that we normally didn't go. And there was a wooden sign on the side of a building that said Georgettes. And I accused Linda of putting it there, and she accused me of putting it there, but neither one of us did. And so that was just one of those magical moments caused by poetry.
But Linda,
look, a dog.
There was also a vehicle. It was
no, there was
a motorcycle, a scooter, something in that little village that had a sticker on it. And what did it say? Poet or poetry or?
Oh yeah.
Poets? Do you remember that?
No, forgotten that one.
Yeah, I remember.
We saw it parked in front of the butcher shop one day.
Good place.
I've got another question in the chat for you, George. So Darcy Tamiose, another fine New West author, has wondering. So Darcy says the commentary that accompanies the poems is wonderful. Regarding Williams Blake's Ah Sunflower on page 38, do you think that the poem would be different if the full stop after the 7th line was omitted?
Oh, that one.
Yeah, it's a pretty very specific question, but
there have been so many essays written about that full stop.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like famous all over the academic world.
The full stop.
Haven't you found it?
Page, Matt, and where that
page 38, and it's the full stop after the 7th line. What's your take on that period? Is it good or bad?
Can you see that, George, to read it?
No, I can't. Wait a minute. Read it out loud.
Ah,
Read the whole second stanza.
well, it's only short. We'll do the whole thing, okay?
Okay.
Ah, sunflower, weary of time, who countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden clime where the traveler's journey is done, where the youth pined away with desire, and the pale virgin shrouded in snow, arise from their graves and aspire, where my sunflower wishes to go.
It's a mistake in the printer. It was obviously a mistake. It's obviously those that you can't trust an Alberta publisher.
I remember we did have to find a few things in the old poems. So
So the question again is,
Yeah, why is it there?
the full Darcy's wondering, do you think that the poem would be different if the full stop after the 7th line was omitted?
Of course it would be
arise
different.
from their graves and aspire where my sunflower wishes to go.
Yeah.
Where the youth pined away with desire and the pale virgin shrouded in snow. Arise from their graves and aspire where my sunflower wishes to go.
Yeah, I think my feeling about Blake, given that he was an artist writing this poem and he was writing it, I don't know whether he did it in glass or copper or what, but he probably erroneously put the period there, or he probably thought, I'm going to use this in the William Blake method of using a period, but not in the way that everybody else uses the period. Both of those things suggest themselves to me. And it is different, and I can feel the difference in them. To aspire, like period, aspire about anything, right? If you put in a period after aspire, it means cease to wish at all for anything, right? Or hope for. Aspire is also sounds a little bit like a star. But one thing I noticed about this poem that I forgot to mention was there's a few sneaky things run through this book that sometimes poems will rhyme with other poems. So this one has the steps of the sun, whereas another poem says, how something thou climbs the sky, O moon, right? With its steps as well. So, and that sort of stuff is running all the way through the poem, all the way through. But one thing I'd like to mention that I'm hoping that people will notice is that if you go to a normal anthology of poems over the last 400 years, there will be the number of women poets will be very, very small compared with the number of men poets. And this anthology has a way higher percentage of women poets than you would find in most anthologies. And sometimes those women poets are African Americans.
On the subject of women poets and punctuation, this is the most discussion I've ever heard of punctuation at a book launch.
You've never been to an English department meeting where you spend half an hour discussing the placement of the semicolon in the minutes from the previous.
No, this very thing happened to me when I was a kid. We were supposed, like when I was a school kid, we were supposed to be understanding the use of the full stop, right? And someone said, is it really, really important to know anything about the period? And I said, well, at home, my sister missed 2 in a row, and we really got excited about it.
I was really, and I probably should know more.
What you were going to bring up?
I loved your Emily Dickinson essay. Yeah. I loved your discussion of the length of the dashes and your demonstration of what would happen or what did happen when the dashes were omitted by early editors of Emily Dickinson's work. They didn't know any of that stuff.
And even when Johnson put them back in, they're all the same length. Right. Because what else could he do? Like she made some that were longer and shorter and like whatever she felt it called for, right? And the people who were setting up to do printing didn't have that number of lengths of dashes to use. So in a sense, it would have made sense to I couldn't necessarily do it in her handwriting, but to publish the book of poems in handwriting, as Lorene Nidecker's people did for one of her books, that was really important. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, just get back to that Twitter question now that you're mentioning Lorene Nidecker.
Oh, yeah.
I think that Lorene Nidecker, Nelson Ball, a few other poets were writing the most perfect, wonderful, concise poems long before Twitter or social media existed.
Yeah.
And I don't know that, my own feeling is I don't know that Twitter has improved things. But I will mention, because Lily Nechikov is here tonight, some social media, for example, I believe that Lillian was really inspired to write and encouraged to write, motivated to write, especially over the early years of the pandemic, because of the existence of social media. And she was cranking out the best poems that she's written in decades. One of them became a book called Il Virus that I edited. I know there's at least one or two other books. So I think social media, as much as I can't stand it on the one hand, has motivated some people to do amazing work that they can immediately share.
It's also motivated another 1,000 people to produce really awful crap.
That's absolutely.
Yeah. Talking about, on the subject of beautiful, very, very short poems, you've probably seen the stuff that Bobby Hogue did the last year or so before he died. All those wonderful, wonderful little wee things that are like most people would doing a few little words, they wouldn't, but these seem so inevitable, seem so beautifully inevitable. And one can get so close that once in a while there'll be one you'll say, yeah, but that's only because it's not as good as the other ones. I'm going to urge people. Bobby Hogue has about 10 new chapbooks out in the last couple of years, and he has, I think, 3 now, two at least. One from Chax, and one from the people that did use from Vancouver.
2 from Ecstasis.
Ecstasis. Oh, 2 with Ecstasis, and one with Chax. Yeah, Chax is a publisher in Tucson, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and Robert Hogue is a guy who could write these incredibly long poems that went on and on. But yeah, in those that last year, he just wrote these amazing gems that sometimes were 6 or 8 lines long. Beautiful.
Yeah. And some of them are like half the size of one of those little Japanese poems. Haiku, yeah. Some of them were half the size of haiku. Yeah, they were sort of like hi.
So we're coming up on an hour here, so I'm just gonna ask any more questions in the chat. Any more quick questions for George and Stuart? No.
Is Stuart in Ontario right now, or the Kootenays?
I'm in Ontario.
Oh, why?
I wish I was in the Kootenays.
Why?
Sorry. Okay, sorry. I meant to ask that earlier.
We do have a note from William Thompson here that the version of, this is going back to the full stop, the version of the poem available at the Poetry Foundation omits the period and replaces it with a comma, which would definitely change the meaning of those lines.
Yeah, I don't trust that outfit.
Yeah, I actually wrote to the Poetry Foundation not that long ago about, who wrote that poem? It's in here. It's the shape.
Oh, the I, right? It's like a letter I.
No,
it's like a tomb or something.
It's an altar.
The altar, yeah. Meredith's got it.
You would not have believed the condition of what the Poetry Foundation had posted that poem.
Yeah.
So it's a deeply funded organization that isn't always meticulous when it comes to those sorts of things.
That's right.
That's on page 20, George Herbert. I seem to remember we did have to clean it up a little bit, because I think that's where we got the text, and we cleaned it up for us. Yeah,
exactly. When we were trying to clean it up, because when George put this together, he just lifted all these poems online, which means who knows, well, not all, but most of them, how accurate they were. It was. So yeah, it was a really big job for New West to track all those down and make sure that they were exact. And the version when this started that the Poetry Foundation had up of this poem, which it's a visual poem, right? So it's the poem is shaped like an altar. They had it running like right to left with end lines. In other words, no understanding at all. Whoever posted it of what was going on.
And it's not the only poem that Herbert has done like that.
Yeah.
He was,
So
I guess he was one of V.P. Nichols' heroes.
I certainly don't want to slam the Poetry Foundation, but it's just the nature of what happens when anybody and their brother can start posting stuff.
Yeah.
It's not always accurate.
So it's a metadata issue. I'm sure Leslie Vermeer, the editor for this book, and I think Meredith had to look at all these again, just double checking everything. But yeah, once things get digitized and they get sent out into the world, they can change a little bit. Formats, different. Even what device you look at it is different. That's what's nice about a good old fashioned book. It's not going to change.
Those challenges are ever so. When I was doing my grad work and doing bibliography, the thing I was assigned was a book that had been put together by all the leftover paper in the print shop, which means it had, I think, like 52 watermarks in the book. And one of the opinions about a Shakespeare folio is, why did this happen? Is they think what actually happened is that the printer had set the text and walking over tripped. And
that's how B.P. Nichols wrote his poem.
And just picked up all of the pieces of font and stuck them in the holes.
What an idea.
So accuracy, when I was a magazine publisher, I always said, once I published a magazine that didn't have a single mistake in it, I would quit. Well, I quit, but not because that happened. I mean, it's just the nature of publishing that.
It does happen. Sometimes happy accidents, but maybe not that happy. But
as much as you try. So when George gets a new book, I always say, "Hey, okay, it's a real book. I found the first mistake."
Yeah. Well, Charles Olson once said that and demonstrated that he was kind of interested in typography problems from the publisher because they were an opening to a new angle on the poem. And you can see a few times when he actually does that, where he takes a typo that he might have made even himself, and instead of continuing on the line he was going in, he veers off to where that typo took him, and makes the poem way better than it probably would have been in the first place.
That's the intervention of the muse. I think we talked about that on the podcast, right?
It is. Yeah, I believe in the muse.
Yeah.
This time you had a book launch where you talked about punctuation.
Yeah, well, this is a new one for me, so that's a lot of fun. The podcast, if you're interested in mine and George's conversation, it's available on all the podcast platforms. Just look up New West Press Audio and you can hear more of George's voice. But we've got links in the chat for Stuart's books as well as Good Morning Poems. So if you like what you heard, apart from that one intrusion, sorry about that again, but that's why you don't put Zoom links on your Facebook and say, hey, come to this, because bad actors will jump in and generally be annoying. But thanks so much, Stuart, and thank you, George, and thank you, Jean, everyone. Thank you to the Georgettes, Leslie and Linda, for reading, and thanks everyone for coming out and appreciating poetry, appreciating punctuation. It's been a wonderful evening. And any questions, just contact us at New West if you want to talk afterwards. But thanks again for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Adios.